Welcome to Talk South Asian to Me, Season 2. My name is Michelle.
And my name is Anisha. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central and hear us react to each other's stories about mental health and growing up in different South Asian households.
And remember, this podcast is not therapy. Engage with what feels entertaining and resonates with you, and leave what doesn't.
Alrighty, let's get into our letter today. We're doing H.
H, woo!
Yeah. I feel like we're kind of shaking it up a little bit because we're not just doing like a topic, we're doing like a how-to topic.
Yeah.
Because for our letter H, we're doing a how-to build self-esteem and self-confidence.
It's a good one.
It's an important one for sure.
Right.
We can all
Very
use
important.
that. So today when I do the research, obviously, as the title says, this is a how-to, which means it's going to be another one of those podcast episodes where it is chock full of tips and research and things that you can actually jot down and implement. So anybody who wants to do that, grab a pen, grab a paper, or a laptop. Does anybody really take notes by hand anymore? I don't know.
I do sometimes.
Sometimes I do, but when I'm attending like lectures like this, sometimes I'll just do it on my computer because I can type faster that way.
That's fair. That's fair.
Well, today the research is coming from a couple of places: positivepsychology.com, verywellmind.com, Mayo Clinic, and of course my personal and professional experiences, as always. It's part of the research. And as you and I have been making a practice of, I thought we would start off by defining terms.
Okay.
So let's start by defining self-esteem. So self-esteem is your subjective sense of overall personal worth or value. Basically, it describes your level of confidence in your abilities and your attributes. And even more simply put, self-esteem is the opinion that we have about ourselves.
Opinion
So
that we have about ourselves. I like that.
Yeah.
Shortened version.
Yeah, it's easy to understand, no fluff. Self-esteem, opinion we have of ourselves.
Exactly.
And when we have a healthy self-esteem, we tend to feel more positively about ourselves and about our life in general. So it makes us better equipped to deal with the things that life throws at us. But when our self-esteem is low, we see ourselves and our life in a more negative and critical light. But not only that, it's also difficult to deal with the challenges that life throws at us.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So self-esteem is not only important because obviously we don't want to feel bad about ourselves, but it's important because it affects the way that we handle life. And life is always going to be throwing things at us. That's part of life, right? So we want to be able to deal with it as best as we can. And one way to do that is to build our self-esteem.
There you go.
Yeah. So to break it down and really conceptualize this a little bit better, what really goes into self-esteem? Some of the key elements that make up self-esteem are self-confidence, feeling secure, your identity, a sense of belonging, and feeling competent. These are all the things that go into someone's self-esteem being high or low. And some of the various factors that can influence our self-esteem, because self-esteem, like a lot of things that we talk about, it's not permanent, right? You don't have a self-esteem and that's where it is. It can change. So some of the things that factor into or influence the self-esteem are our genetics, our personality, our life experiences, our age, health, our thoughts, social circumstances, when we compare ourselves to others, how often we do that, and the reaction of others.
I'm surprised by the genetics one. I don't think I've ever heard about that. It's so interesting.
Yeah. That one surprised me too. But I guess in a certain way, it makes sense, right? Everything is a bit of both, the genetics and the learned experiences.
Nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
But I almost wonder like if this relates to like personality traits and things like that too that are genetic as well.
Probably, yeah. I would
or
say
temperament, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. Okay.
And, to go into the genetics piece of it too, it's maybe our genetics plays a part in what we're more inclined, like our baseline, what we're more inclined to, how we see the world or how we deal with problems. And maybe it goes into that, like that perspective maybe comes from, a little bit of the genetics, but it also really can be changed. So it's not just about genetics. which I think is why this is like a factor that can influence, but there's all this other stuff.
Yeah. I think it's like contributes, right? It's not the only
Yeah,
thing. That makes
exactly.
sense.
The one that I really spent a second like really thinking on was that last one, the reaction of others and how that influences our
Mm,
self-esteem. I really held on to that one because I think that shows up a lot
mm,
in people whose parenting and like their like early experiences where they develop low self-esteem. I think it has to do with that, because what it made me think of was, if we're not feeling worthy or deserving or lovable,
yeah.
usually what I've found in my work is that we can trace that back to when we were young and we made mistakes or we didn't live up to expectations. Parents or teachers or whoever might have made us feel like we were the problem rather than we've made a mistake or the problem was the problem.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Right? It's an external versus internal thing. And so when people
Mm-hmm.
make you feel like you're the one who is a problem, you're not worthy, you're not deserving, you're not lovable because XYZ, whether that's something that's said or is something maybe nonverbal that you just pick up and you believe, that can lead to the low self esteem, the reaction of other people.
Yeah. That makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah. And it can also work in the flip way, in the sense of, even if someone is not making you feel like you're the problem for making mistakes or things like that, it can also, the outcome is still the same if someone is praising you for your self-sacrificial behaviors, right? We've talked often about how that leads to like
Mm,
people pleasing. Well, that's a big part of
yeah.
self-esteem too.
Right. Positive reinforcement.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This is toxic.
Yeah, this is the toxic. Yep, definitely. And I don't know about you. Actually, I do know about you. In our general growing up process in our communities,
Yeah.
we often get compared to when we're kids.
Right.
Even now, I'm sure, but especially when we were children, right? And
Yeah. Absolutely.
that instills in us this like okayness of, okay, yeah, we need to compare ourselves to know where we stand.
Mm-hmm.
Not helpful for self-esteem. Definitely not
Yeah.
helpful.
That's not helpful.
Yeah. But that's another way of how like the reaction of others and how that impacts self-esteem from early on can really make these longer lasting impacts in adulthood.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Very long lasting, very impactful.
Yeah. Exactly. So I thought we could start off with maybe some examples, right?
Yeah.
Self-esteem it seems self-explanatory, but it's one of those things that it's hard to really point to and say that's what it is. It
Yeah.
seems a little bit abstract sometimes. So I wanted to give some examples. One example that I picked up was, imagine a high achieving student who takes a difficult exam and earns a failing grade. If this
Okay.
student has a high self esteem, she will likely chalk up her failure to factors like not studying hard enough, or a particularly difficult set of questions, or simply having an off day. Basically, external things, like we said
Right.
earlier.
This is for high self esteem,
Yes.
external factors that
Mhm.
contributed to the failure. Okay.
But what she doesn't do is conclude that she must be stupid and that she will probably fail all future tests too because of that. That comes from more of a lower self esteem. You turn inwards, which makes sense,
Mm,
right? Low self esteem because you're putting yourself down. High self esteem, it's about what's happening outside of your control. It's not necessarily your fault.
right.
Yeah. And just to hone it in a little bit deeper, the second example I have is, think about a young man who goes out on a
Mm-hmm.
first date and he
Mm-hmm.
really likes this woman he's going out with. So he's really eager to make a good impression and connect with her. Over the course of their discussion on the date, he learns that she is motivated and driven by completely different values and has very different tastes in almost everything. Instead of going along with her expressed opinions on things, he offers up his own views and isn't afraid to disagree with her. His
Mm,
high self esteem makes him stay true to his values and allows him to easily communicate with others still, even when they don't agree. To him,
mm.
it's more important to behave authentically than to focus on getting the date to like him.
Oh. So, to my understanding, what you're saying in that example is that if there's a disagreement, right, then the person who's showing high self esteem would not be afraid to speak their mind, right, and disagree because they're they're confident in what they believe in and they're not. So this is tricky. Like, it's like internal versus external. Like, oh, they don't worried about the external reaction. They're
Yeah,
like confident in themselves. So it's like a little
exactly.
flip example, but still the same thing, like
Yeah,
self-esteem. It's
yeah.
tricky business.
It's tricky business, which is why I thought it was important to have these examples because sometimes
Yeah.
until we put it to like an example, it's hard to visualize some of this stuff.
Yeah. But you know that what I'm seeing the theme between those two examples, even though they're so very different,
Mm.
is that the negative self-talk or the fear of negativity coming onto you. Like it's like that's the theme, right?
Yeah,
The negative
essentially,
self-view, right? Like for the first
exactly,
example, the exam one, I'm stupid, I didn't do well, I'm horrible, I'm gonna fail. And the same thing with the disagreement. I have to agree, I can't disagree, right? Like no matter what, I have to agree, right? Like if I don't, then I'm gonna look bad, right? Like all of that.
exactly. And that is the key part of self-esteem, right? It's you don't turn immediately on yourself. You just take a pause and
Mm,
you ask yourself, how can I, like in the second example, especially,
okay.
he can still communicate easily and hold
Right.
a dialogue and be respectful, but he can also say, but I disagree. Here's what I believe. Totally okay
Right.
that you believe that. I believe this.
Yeah.
This is okay. It doesn't
That's
have to,
awesome.
you know, mean anything more than that,
Hmm.
right? And this is something I see actually a lot. I was just talking about this today with a client too about dating and behaving
Mm,
authentically versus people
people
pleasing in those
pleasing.
moments.
Mm.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding.
And on track, one of the things that I'm working on with that client is self esteem.
Yeah. It's very
So it's a
related.
very real life example.
Yeah. I think it's very intertwined. People
Mhm.
pleasing and self esteem.
Yeah. So instead of going, to highlight, wrap this up, instead of going along with her expressed opinion on things, right, he can offer his own views. In the other example, instead of immediately saying, like, she's deficient, she recognizes, well, did I study hard enough? Okay, well, maybe that's why I didn't get a good grade. Or
Mm.
maybe these questions were just extra hard because I really studied. And like,
Yeah.
that can happen too, right? So it's just
Yeah.
about basically critically thinking and honoring what's true to you instead of being quick to put yourself down, blame yourself.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so I thought we could go over some helpful tips on increasing self esteem. Now, this is obviously not an exhaustive, comprehensive list, but there's quite a lot. So buckle in. Here we go.
Okay. I'm ready.
And there's a lot. So I don't even know like how many there are. I haven't even counted. There's just so many. So I'm just going to go
Okay.
through and we'll, talk through it bit by
Okay.
bit.
That sounds
Feel free
good.
to interrupt. There's a lot.
Okay. Okay.
The first thing I've got is to recognize when what situations are affecting self esteem, right? So, this is always a helpful thing. When you're not entirely sure what your self esteem or your self confidence or your whatever it is that you want to think about, where that's coming from,
Mm-hmm.
just take a pause and think about what are situations in the past that this has come up.
Right.
So figure out basically what your triggers are. That could be work, that could be presenting at school, that can be anytime crisis happens at work or home.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's dealing with challenges with like a spouse, a loved one, anybody, right? Or maybe it just comes about when there are like major changes in your life, things like that. So just understand what your triggers are so that you can understand what is behind the self esteem that's changing. So that one, you can prepare in the future, but two, you can also deal with
Yeah.
it.
That makes sense. But that's a lot of work too to figure
Yeah.
out what your triggers are. It's a lot of self
Oh, yeah.
acknowledgement. It's a huge
Yeah,
step. Yeah.
it is.
But I feel like it is important and one of the keys to help increase and build your self esteem.
Yeah. Yeah. I always
Yeah.
tell my clients before you can learn anything or do anything, you have to first be aware. Because if you're not even
Right.
aware of when it's happening, you can't apply it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. The next thing I've got is identify your inner critic's voice and really evaluate its helpfulness.
Mm,
We all have a self critical voice that comes in
yes.
time to time, but it's not always true. Like any of our thoughts, they're not always true.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So when you hear that voice, don't jump to feel it and believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Pause and ask yourself, is that thought, is that thing that the inner critic is saying true? Does that
Mm-hmm.
even serve you, even if it is true? And is that something that you would say to a friend?
Mm. It's a good
That's a big
question
one.
to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. And if it's not something that you would say to a friend, and a friend was feeling that way, what would you say to your friend? Reframe that
Mm.
for yourself.
I like that. Reframing. Another
Reframing.
favorite word.
The other thing, kind of jumping off of that same idea of those kinds of thoughts, is challenging, like the negative thinking, because the initial thought that you have is not always going to be appropriate for the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So, like we talked about earlier, just kind of reflect and really try and understand it further. And sometimes it's hard, right? Sometimes it's hard to see the flaws in our own logic
Yeah.
because they're like long held thoughts. We've always thought that way. So they feel like facts instead of opinions.
Yes. Brain is tricky.
Yeah, it is. It catches you like that sometimes.
Yes.
So I thought we could break down real quick just a couple of different kinds of negative thinking and what they look like to give an idea of what I mean by that.
Okay.
So the most common one I see is all or nothing thinking. Basically, this means you see everything as it's either this or it's the opposite. There's no in between. You might think, for example, if I don't succeed in this task, then I'm a total failure. And there's no in between. It's not that I failed at this task.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the failure. I can't do this, which is not true. Rarely is anything in this world truly, truly all or nothing.
Yeah.
I say rarely because never say never, but everything's on a spectrum. And if that's
Yeah.
true, then when we think in this way, it's helpful to question and ask, okay, what's the middle ground here? What am I not identifying? Another kind of thinking is mental filtering. This means basically when you're focusing and dwelling on the negatives. It distorts the way that you view yourself or a situation. For example, I made a mistake on that report, and now everyone will realize I'm not up to the job. Simply not true.
So true.
Yeah. Another pretty popular one that I see often is jumping to negative conclusions. So you may tend to reach a negative conclusion with little or no evidence, usually, when you're thinking this way. For example, my friend hasn't replied to my text, so I must have done something to make her angry. Jumping to the worst case scenarios.
Catastrophizing. I know we talked about that term in the previous episode, right? Thinking of the worst case scenario.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Another one that I see often is, particularly with a different generation, is mistaking your feelings for facts. So you might confuse your feelings or your beliefs with facts.
It's a good one.
So yeah, instead of saying I feel like a failure, you think I am a failure because I feel it.
And our brain tends to turn feelings into facts without even us realizing, right? The subconscious, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Those are the main ones. I mean, there are more, but those are the ones I see often as examples. And I bet we've all engaged in at least one or a few of these at some point in our lives.
Negative thinking is no stranger to me.
We wish it were, but it's not.
Nowadays it has been, so it's good.
It's a distant visitor. We don't see it.
Yes, there you go.
Good. Another tip outside of the whole thinking thing, going back to what we were talking about earlier, like reframing. So reframing the thoughts and beliefs. And that could look like, choosing to reframe with more hopeful statements, not I don't want you to lie to yourself, but instead of, focusing on that negative, focus on the positives of what actually went well. You don't have to ignore all the negative, but make room for the positive. Make room for things like, okay, even though this is really tough, I can handle this. I can figure it out.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that's a big one. And in reframing these thoughts and beliefs, I mean, also make space to forgive yourself. Recognize that mistakes are mistakes. They don't define who you are. So forgive yourself. Another big one around this.
Yeah.
Should statements.
Should statements.
Avoid the should statements or the I must statements.
Or what ifs.
They're simply not true.
Yeah, or the what ifs.
Yeah. They're just simply not true. Because who's saying and who's dictating what you should and what you must? It's not going to be authentic to you. You don't need to should yourself into things that are inauthentic and unaligned. And the last one that I really like with this reframing is consider what you've learned.
Mm.
Growth mindset, essentially,
Yeah.
right?
It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really all I have to say about the reframing piece of this. Other helpful tips in general to increase self esteem, maybe spending some time to actually appreciate things about yourself. If you're actively
Mm.
focusing on this, spend some time whenever you can, every day, every week, maybe, and just jot down a few things that you have done that you appreciate about yourself. Celebrate your wins, acknowledge and appreciate the things you've done. Also, perfectionism. That's a
Oh,
big one that tends to
it's a
come
big
up
one.
with self esteem.
Mm-hmm. For
Yeah, you're
sure.
like, oh, I know.
It's in my story.
Is it?
It is.
Can't wait to hear. Yeah. So, as you've probably experienced, perfectionism and self esteem, not good. More perfectionism, more you lean into it, the lower self esteem you're inevitably going to have because you're tying your self worth to that perfectionism. And as you know, perfection doesn't exist. So, if you're
Mm-hmm.
tying your self worth to it, unattainable, you're not going to feel worthy. So,
So
avoid
powerful.
perfectionism.
Yeah. Perfection is unattainable. And if
True.
you, like you said, if self-esteem is connected to that, you will never
Exactly.
achieve that high self-esteem.
But that one is a bit tricky. I find that
Mm.
most people, I guess it's silly for me to say as a therapist, because the people who find it hard to deal with perfectionism, obviously they come to therapy. So
Mm-hmm.
I was about to say perfectionism might be one of those things that you might need to unpack with a therapist, but obviously I would say that because I see clients who actually need to.
Right, right.
But I wonder, yeah, I mean, with anything, perfectionism is also on a spectrum. So maybe if you get really curious to it without judgment, you can identify your perfectionism urge and break that down.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
If you can't, there's always therapy.
There you go.
um, yeah. And another one that I really like, as I kind of mentioned already with the reframing, is just having a growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really big one.
And it's a really big one. And I think that's like a very tricky one too, I would say, because sometimes it's not easy for people to have that growth mindset,
Yeah.
right? I feel like in order
Mhm.
to have a growth mindset, you have to really step away from the internalizing and really come out and say, like, okay, what is in my control externally?
Yeah.
What can I change?
Yeah.
Right? How can I
Exactly.
grow?
They go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
You increase your self esteem, you increase your ability to have a growth mindset. You
Right.
decrease your growth mindset, you decrease your self esteem. They go
Yeah.
very hand in hand.
Yeah.
Obviously, as we talked about much earlier on, too, don't fall into the comparison trap. And
Mm.
sometimes that can look like, for some people, limiting social media time.
Yeah.
For some people, that can look like not engaging with people as much who often compare you to people.
Yeah.
You know, the
People there are like that.
aunties and uncles out there, don't compare, please don't.
Yeah. Even with little kids, it sticks.
Yes, definitely does. They're very
Mm-hmm.
impressionable. We all are.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
So the exact opposite of that, do spend more time with people who are supportive.
Mm. And loving.
Exactly. Loving. People who are your cheerleaders. Or
Yeah.
at the very least, neutral. Even neutral is better.
Mm-hmm.
And last few, I'm finally down to my last couple here. Be prepared. So the idea is essentially for whatever situation you're about to go into, if self-esteem is uncertainty and feeling like you can't trust yourself, feeling like you aren't competent, practice being prepared then. The more
Mm-hmm.
that you prepare, hopefully the better that you do. And hopefully you can continue to add data points to yourself, your mind and body, and say, I am competent. I can do
Mm-hmm.
this.
Mm-hmm.
So be prepared. And
There
that
you
can
go.
look like, mock interviews before a job interview. That can look
Yeah.
like acting well with
Mm-hmm.
confidence. You feel good, you act confident, right?
Exactly.
Also, remind yourself of your achievements. Like I said earlier, right, with taking time to actually acknowledge them and list them out. Maybe even have a list. Have a running list on your phone somewhere and write down all the reasons why you do belong, all the reasons why you do feel competent, all the reasons why you do feel secure,
Mm-hmm.
all the reasons why you feel confident. in your
Yeah.
ability and yourself as a person. Maybe make a
Right.
list so that the times that it's hard to remember, you don't have to try so hard. You can just go look at the list.
Right. I like that idea.
Yeah. Okay. And then the second to last one, affirmations. So I
Mm.
have a couple I want to share. I want to see what resonates with you.
Okay.
Okay. So one, mistakes are a stepping stone to success. They are the path I must tread to achieve my dreams.
Well, that's a good one.
Then there's also, I am worthy of all the good things that happen in my life.
I love that one.
I deserve the love I am given.
Wow.
I have or can quickly get all the knowledge I need to succeed.
Words are
Those are
really
all.
powerful.
Yeah.
I will say, like, in my experience, like the I affirmations that start with an I have been made a huge difference for me. Like, just like I am deserving of the love I'm given, right? Like all of those types of affirmations I feel like are very I'm allowed to make mistakes, like all these different things.
And affirmations really are more effective when they're really tailored to you.
Yes.
Just make sure they're positive
Mm-hmm.
side of things. Like, don't say, I can't XYZ, or like, I don't,
Mm-hmm.
blah, blah, blah. Just reframe that in the positive, right?
Right.
So, I am able to do this. I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that is tailored to what you're struggling with, these affirmations set in that I am kind of way,
Mm-hmm.
not lies, just something that actually feels like it fits for you.
Yeah.
That could be really powerful to just, say that to yourself a few times and just like feel what that feels like in your body to even hear those words.
Mm-hmm.
Not a solution cure all, but it definitely, words matter. Words
They
really
do.
matter.
They do. They're powerful.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my last tip is pick a goal or a challenge, map out all the realistic, doable baby steps to getting there. And remember, think like slow and steady wins the race for these baby steps. It's not about like big steps, right?
Yeah.
Slow and steady
Big
wins the race.
steps.
So pick a goal or a challenge, map out the realistic, doable baby steps in getting there.
Yeah.
Focus on the effort and not the
Mm-hmm.
outcome. Because when you're doing that, you can focus on more of the discipline and dedication rather than
Yeah.
worrying about like motivation, which is going to come and go anyway.
Yeah.
And do not listen to your inner critic voice. And maybe have a support system in place, whether those are friends who can cheerlead for you, whether it's a family, whether it's a coach, a mentor, whether it's a therapist, whoever it is.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. And
Those are
this
good
one is a little
tips.
bit different than the other one in that it's very like concretely specific so that if you act on it, you're basically building quick data points for yourself
Right.
that you are competent, that you are, all the things that self-esteem says you're not.
Exactly.
Yeah. That was a lot of tips, wasn't it?
It was, but they were good. They were important to share. So I'm glad you did.
Yeah. They were good. Some very helpful. Some felt a little repetitive. And it was what?
Because good examples too. It's helpful to better conceptualize it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Conceptualizing it is important for sure in these
Exactly.
abstract-y kind of
Yeah.
concepts.
It's very abstract.
Yeah. So I thought for the more South Asian spin of all of this, I would actually just find I found on Reddit on
Mm.
I'm not very eloquent with Reddit, so I don't know what to
Yeah, me
call it. Like
neither.
the thing that you go to, the page, perhaps. I don't know what it's
Yeah.
called. It was called ABC Daisies, like ABCD.
Okay. Okay.
And someone had asked like how to really build self-esteem and confidence. And so I basically noted a couple of different ones that people said.
Okay.
I didn't note down who said it because there's a level of anonymity to Reddit, so I don't know who said it, but here we
Yeah.
go.
Okay.
Some of the things that were said is what a couple of things that helped this person was changing their perspective about themselves, the story
Mm-hmm.
of their life, and who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then surrounding themselves with people who genuinely like them and want the best for them.
Wow.
Don't compare them to others because they are unique and so is their journey. I loved that they said that.
I love it too.
And then they
Wow.
focused on the things that they liked to do. This person goes on to say that They also tried this trick in, I think that's right. They also tried this trick in their 20s. Every 3 to 4 months, they would have a me goal. It may be traveling to a new place, trying a new
Mm.
class, socializing in a new group, or a new physical activity.
Wow.
Yeah. So they traveled internationally, and they said that solo traveling for them was life changing.
Wow. I've
They
always
said
wondered
that,
about that, solo traveling.
yeah, it seems as thrilling as it does, maybe a little bit terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they also talked about things, particular things that they've picked up that have like made them feel more like themselves and build their
Mm-hmm.
self-esteem as a result. For example, cooking classes, like learning a new language, playing the guitar, and pushing outside their comfort zone with physical activities like rock climbing, doing
Mm-hmm.
salsa. That's fun. But they had one rule, and that rule was that they could suck and absolutely, completely, truly face plant on all of these things and be okay with it. That was a rule they had for themselves when they went out on this
Wow.
journey, um, which they said was really helpful for them and key because there was nothing to compete for and there was nothing to try to be good at or perfect it.
Or compared
That
to.
anything.
I love it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's what started to help them, love their life more, not take things seriously, and just really feel more confident.
Wow. That's awesome.
It was a really good example too of a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
things that we talked about summarized in a real
Mm-hmm.
way for this person's life and how they changed their self-esteem.
Yeah. I love that.
Another person said, build who you are based on your interests, not that of your parents. That's a start. While others throw all the negative effects of your choices, be firm in your decision in your choices and execute them. Just be yourself and push through it. It starts at home. That was their take on it.
Yeah. I like the first point. Can you read that part again? Like something with the
Yeah.
parents?
Build who you are based on your interests, not that of
Mm-hmm.
your parents. That's a
Yeah.
start.
I feel like that's something that's very common in the South Asian community is that, ever since you were young, maybe like some parents, maybe not so much in today's generation or the newer parents, but like maybe our parents or our parents' parents would kind of determine,
Mhm.
the future choices
Yeah.
that their child should make, right? When it comes to career, when it comes to like friends or just like different aspects of life and
Yeah.
want to have control over that. And so sometimes the self-esteem, I'm sure it can be related to that is that, if choices are made for you, if, you know, you weren't you weren't given the opportunity to build trust within yourself,
Mhm.
you know, that could probably contribute to low self esteem is that if you don't know how to trust yourself and your gut and your choices, your own decisions, and you never knew how to do that, you grew up not being able to do that, that could probably lead to some lower self esteem.
Like, it's not uncommon for us as kids, and maybe even now as
Yeah.
adults sometimes, to think, well, more so as kids, to think that our parents like know everything and like
Yeah.
what they believe is so true. Sometimes when you're young like that, you hold your parents on this pedestal of they know better instead of the reality, which is they're human like us. They know what they
Yeah.
know. They don't know what they don't know.
Exactly.
And what happens often, as really insightfully put, is you don't get the opportunity to build trust in yourself and
Hmm.
make mistakes for yourself.
Right.
And instead, you trust somebody else. So when you experience things not go your way in adulthood, now you start to doubt yourself. You don't feel like you're competent. You feel like you
Hmm.
can't
Negative self
handle
talk
the situation.
increases. Yeah. Wow.
Exactly. Insightfully put.
Thanks. You helped me put it together.
Another user had this to say:
Okay.
mindset change. That was their big thing, mindset change. They
Mindset
said that there are
change.
2 steps from this: learning to view things in another light, and then actually
Mm.
applying this newfound belief to your life.
Mm.
They also go on to say, something that the other person had said, try new things, find ways that you can learn from the situation. Growth mindset again, see?
Yeah.
um, and see everything you do as a new opportunity to grow. Growing a better understanding of the world and myself helped me feel more confident.
It's a good one. I like that
Yeah.
one.
And the last one I have to share is about someone who says, I feel like a big reason my confidence is low is due to being raised in Western society while our parents expect us to adhere to values from back home. In my
Mm,
case, my parents have conflicting views, one being a liberal atheist while the other a conservative religious. And
mm,
this added to my lack of confidence. Basically, if you don't know your values, then you can end up not confident and directionless. I
wow.
would say reading and working out were the two biggest game changers for me. I learned a lot about myself and the world by reading, and this helped me develop my own worldview by knowing what I
Wow.
stand for. And I now take actions towards how I want my life and the world to end up. Working out, while cliche, has also helped me develop confidence in myself. I agree with that. I feel like when I
Yeah,
started lifting
working out.
weights, I felt powerful. I felt like
Yeah,
I can do
same,
anything.
same. It's I I say this so much to everybody around me. I'm sure you've heard this too. Like working out is just like physical and like everything. Like physical, mental, emotional. There's just so much benefits to it. It's so
I'm
amazing.
tired.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
totally. I feel like such a sense of accomplishment when I go up
Yes,
a weight and I can like
exactly.
bench a little bit more. I'm always like, oh my goodness, I'm strong.
Yes,
It's such
yes,
a
you are.
boost.
You are.
I really am. It's
Yeah.
definitely a boost, and that's a really good, physically tangible way
Mm-hmm.
to feel your self esteem grow. It
Yeah.
really does. Before I talk about my story, I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to talk about a quick quote that
Okay.
I found about
Okay.
all the self esteem and everything. So, the quote is by Louise L. Hay, and the quote is, remember, you have been criticizing yourself for years and it has not worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens.
Me too. I love that too.
I love that. And it's so like, it's so simple, but it's so like meaningful,
It
right?
is
Because I
meaningful.
think, yeah, because I
Mm-hmm.
think that sometimes people don't realize, but they're like, well, I don't know if it's going to work for me. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
what you have tried, has that worked for you? The answer is no. Might as well give it a shot, see what happens.
Yeah,
Nothing to lose.
exactly. Nothing to lose. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is it for my research today.
Okay.
Now let's left is my story. You ready?
I'm ready. Yes, I'm ready. I'm excited.
It's a pretty quick observational note, I should say. I thought about self esteem and what it was like when I was much younger. And I thought about
Okay.
how when I was younger, like elementary school, middle
Mm-hmm.
school, maybe even a little bit of high school, I was predominantly in a school of white people. Like there wasn't a lot of
Mm-hmm.
diversity. And
Yeah.
even if there was any diversity, there certainly wasn't a lot of people, who look like me, South
Yeah.
Asians. So I always struggled with the identity and sense of belongingness piece
Mm.
of the self-esteem when I was younger. And that's a fairly common thing that a lot of bicultural folk go through, right? It's
Right.
you look different, you feel different, it makes you self-conscious, it makes you
Mm-hmm.
feel like where do I belong? Who am I? Those
Yeah.
kinds of things to not ground yourself with can be really difficult for your self-esteem,
It
especially
can.
when you're that young.
Exactly. Yeah.
In high school, where I met you, my lovely friend, and others who were South Asian, I started to feel a little bit more like I had a place. But I think because I didn't feel that for so long, I think my desire to earn my worthiness and earn these friendships has
Mm-hmm.
really paved the way, or like really exacerbated my people pleasing tendencies then.
Mm.
Yeah, not great.
Yeah.
Eventually in college, through different kinds of friendships, different kinds of experiences that they go through, I had a lot of friends who were like older too.
Mm-hmm.
Between therapy, between just being a little bit more physically distant for some of my friends, I learned how to set boundaries. And through those
That's good.
boundaries, I started gravitating more to those who made space for my boundaries and didn't make me
Mm.
feel bad for having them. And I
Find the
think,
ones that love you and support you. Right.
yeah, for me, rather than
Mm.
demanding something of me and expecting something that I couldn't sustainably meet.
Exactly.
So when I started making more space for that and I started gravitating more to that and allowing myself to be okay with that and
Mm-hmm.
be okay with maybe the inevitable distancing of those who didn't make that okay, That's how I think I really started paving a space for growth with my self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I can ever say truly like, oh my God, self-esteem, I'm all that. It's fine. I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't think we can ever truly say that. But I definitely have more days, a lot more days where I feel confident in my ability to handle things than I don't, which I feel is a win.
It is.
Over
It's a
time
huge win.
yeah, over time I've built the tools and how to evaluate myself, how to basically my growth mindset. This is why I was like
Mm-hmm.
really hung up on this idea because
Yeah.
I feel like the growth mindset is what truly was key in my shift from having low self-esteem
Mm-hmm.
to higher self-esteem. It was that recognition that it doesn't matter what else is happening. It doesn't matter what I can or
Mm-hmm.
can't do. I can always learn. That was a big one. So some things now that I thought about that make me feel really good and make me, add to my self-esteem. Lifting weights, like I said, it makes me feel really
Yes.
powerful.
Woohoo.
I feel good.
That's
Um,
good.
being a therapist makes me feel really competent, so that adds to my self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
My friends who make me feel like I belong and I have a sense of security with, that
Yeah.
adds to my self-esteem. And then, as I've been saying again and again and again, my growth mindset allows me
Mm-hmm.
that confidence to tackle anything and the trust that I have the skills or can develop the skills. And I have the support system to cheer me on if I need to develop it still.
Right.
This is what I think are like the reasons why I have more good days with self-esteem than bad days are this. This is what makes up most of my time right now. And all of these things currently fuel my self-esteem.
Yeah. Wow.
That's my story.
Woohoo. Go Anusha. So proud of you for her. Like your growth mindset, setting boundaries, focusing on you. I know that sounds cliche, but putting yourself first, I feel like that's this first step of
Yeah.
self-esteem and self-confidence. That's so awesome. So
Thank you,
proud.
beautiful.
I appreciate you sharing your journey. It's so funny. I think like the way I wrote my story was very similar to yours in the like structures. It's like it's going to be interesting, just like hearing your story and like the differences that I'll share, but almost a little similar too. It's so interesting how self-esteem really starts so young, right? There's just so much research out there. Even like the kids that I work with, giving them a sense of control and high self-esteem in a hospital environment where they don't have control a lot, like is so important to build their self-esteem because then they can feel secure and trust the environment, even though if the environment can be scary. So I think self-esteem just starts so young, and it's the journey of self-esteem, the impact, the impressions really linger, like you said, in your research and in your experience. Like they can keep moving with you. And then doing a lot of that unpacking, recognizing your triggers, building those tools, using the tips that you share to help increase it is so important. So for my story, I'll kind of start also like in a chronological in life order. I would say, just looking back, this is like my reflection later in life, just talking about my parents, that piece that we talked about from the Reddit story too, about parents. I think parenting and how you were treated and talked to really impact a child's self-esteem and how you were spoken to. And I think in my experience, just looking back, I feel that my parents showed me lots of love. They showed me lots of care. But I know I've shared this in previous episodes where their time was split between, taking care of my sister and everything that she's been dealing with and had to deal with at a very young age. And then me as being the elder, healthier sister that didn't need as much like, physical care and had to be really independent right away. And so when it came to my self-esteem and my confidence at a young age, it was really defined by like my parents' response to how well I did in school, what awards I got, like student of the month. That's when they would show up, or when the report card that was. So again, right, like that conditional love can really be intertwined with how you feel about yourself, right? Like, because in a young age, the way you're spoken to, the way you're treated can be reflected how you treat yourself, right? So early on, it gained those people pleasing tendencies, but then also adopted the idea where if I make mistakes, I'm not going to receive that love or that, that care that I do want from everybody around me. So, and I think we talked about this in previous episodes too, where this is very intergenerational, right? This is very, it has to do with, our parents probably were treated the same way or, worse maybe when it comes to their self-esteem. I've seen low self-esteem in my parents in different ways, right? They weren't probably given the tools or like the way they were spoken to at a young age that allowed them to instill like higher self-esteem. So I do see like these patterns a lot where it was almost passed down to me too, where your work ethic, how hard you work, your accomplishments, your achievements, your academics, those kind of define your self-esteem. And sometimes when you're not doing well at work or you're not doing, if you're not getting the reaction you want from others, then you really are hard on yourself and you're kind of doing that negative thinking, that negative self-talk. So I would say that's probably like something that was passed down to me too, just from example and just from the way like conditional love was given in the beginning. But I would say that self-esteem and confidence has really been a struggle for me ever since I was young. Um, and I think for me personally, there are many factors that have contributed to my low self-esteem. So I have like a couple. So the first one I wanted to talk about was like, the people around me, their influence, and the society's influence, such as the media. So I want to say like when I was as young as probably like younger than 10 years old, I remember watching TV shows, movies, advertisements that would insinuate a certain look that fits the stereotype, right? Like the flat tummy, the tall, right? Like slender, like that look. And, my body didn't look like that. And so that lowered my self-esteem, my body image, and kind of started having me talk negatively to myself about my body, especially the years of like when I reached puberty, when my body was changing a lot, right? That like awkward phase where, yeah, which is not fun to remember, but I feel like that also contributed to like not the society not really normalizing that your body's different, like it changes a lot during puberty, but really focusing on that misrepresentation of body image that can contribute to many people's low self-esteem. But that, I was one of them. So I would compare myself a lot to others in the media. When it comes to like the people around me, I would also receive like side comments. And I've mentioned that too, like during gatherings, during dinner, people would comment about my weight and how much I eat, or like, how much, weight I should put off, right? There was like even this random uncle that I don't even know, like in my community, that came up to me and told me like, you need to lose weight. And I had no idea who he was. And this is, yeah. So it's just like things like that really like played a role to talk negatively to myself at such a young age. And, to continue on or to kind of stress, like we talked about, is that all these things that happened even when I was young can have a long lasting impact, clearly, right? Like I'm way past that age. It's been 10 years, almost 20 years past that, and I still remember very vividly. Um, so another factor that I wanted to talk about that contributed to my lower self-esteem and confidence is, we talked about this, perfectionism and people-pleasing tendencies that I have, that I'm working through. So, right, the double trouble, right? Both of them, perfectionism and people-pleasing. So, for example, when I'm completing a task for someone or with someone and I make a mistake, I feel guilty, I spiral, get upset at myself, negative self-talk, start engaging in that, right? Which leads to that lower self-esteem. That's something that happened a lot. Another big one that you mentioned in the beginning when you were defining self-esteem was like the reaction of others. And that was like something that really like played a role in my low self-esteem, was my like struggle with how like my abandonment, or like people, like if I make a mistake, or if I do something wrong accidentally, like they're not going to love me anymore, they're going to leave, right? So all of that was contributing to my negative self-esteem, not negative, lower self-esteem, and my negative self-talk. And I would say that looking back, the way I would, think about myself, the way I would speak to myself really reflected subconsciously on how others would treat me. Like my negative self-talk would give off negative energy or open the door for people to talk negatively to me too. Like it would be like a cycle. And so like it's just so interesting. I'm trying to think back of all the things that I did that were maybe not, like looking back, it wasn't healthy, but at that time I thought it was healthy. Like something that comes into my mind right now is when it comes to the body image issue that I dealt with in high school. I remember I was 17 years old, Anisha, and I did Insanity. Do you remember Insanity? Like those workouts? Like P90X, Insanity. Yes, my 17-year-old self would do this every day. And I will say I credit Insanity for my strong legs today, but it wasn't healthy. Like I'm pretty sure that was probably not safe for me to do, you know? But I did those things, you know? It's just thinking back, I'm like, I can't believe I did that. And so just like fast forward to more recently, now that I'm doing therapies, I think one of the things that I have been doing even before I started therapy was focusing on the external, right? Like, okay, like maybe look, going to the doctors, I do realize like there are some blood results or like the way the BMI, like that's not maybe what I want to be, right? Even though BMI, I have so many thoughts about that. That's like on the white people standard. But when it comes to like where my health goals are and how I feel about myself and my body, not comparing myself, but how I want to feel, right? How do I want my clothes to feel on me? Like all those different things. I decided that, okay, I'm going to start working out or take care of myself in that way. So, not restrictive eating or not excessive working out, but like incorporating working out. Yep. Going to like, workouts that are more feasible for my body. And then doing meal preps where I'm, eating well, eating well-rounded meals, right? Not restricting, but like eating nutritious meals that are filling that, and then also make my tummy feel good, make me feel good. And I think that was like a little bit of my first step of my journey of increasing my self-esteem, because what happened was I would come out from working out like in such a better mood, if like not just like immediate, there was immediate rewards too, and long-term rewards, short-term and long-term. And it was so helpful to reflect on that okay, I did this for myself and I feel good, so let's keep doing it, right? Not that I did this because I'm trying to lose weight. It's that I feel good. It's like listening to my body, listening to myself, giving a voice to myself and listening to it, right? Giving it a chance to speak. And so it's like that approval that you said, right? Like giving your chance to speak and listening and approving it. And same thing with meal prep. Like whenever I would make my meal prep meals, I would feel so good, like more energy throughout the day. And again, right, that it became a positive cycle where I was like, okay, let me keep doing this because it feels good. Um, and that kind of trickled down into, once I started therapy, doing a lot of one of the biggest things I struggled with in therapy, that I started off therapy also for, was a lot of that reaction of others, fear of abandonment, thinking about that people will leave me. So that negative thinking patterns and negative self-talks, I worked through a lot. And I resonated so much of what you said about the brain sometimes having a fuzzy line between facts and feelings. And my brain was doing that a lot during those negative thinking patterns. It was turning my feelings into facts. Like, oh, I did this, or it's a fact. This person already left me. They just haven't said it yet. You know what I mean? Like it was just like it was bad. Like it was a spiral. And so in therapy, things that help me get rid of those negative thinking patterns or questioning them. So I asked, every time a thought would come up, I would ask why. Why would this person do that? Why that? Like keep asking why, like an annoying like toddler that
Yeah.
keeps asking why in life, right? Keep asking why, and then eventually I reached to a point where it was ridiculous. Like I would be like, oh yeah, I don't know why, right? Like that's ridiculous that I'm thinking that. Um, Affirmations, like we talked about, was really big for me. You know, I deserve the love that was given to me. That was like similar to ones that I used to, where you know help me combat my negative self-talk and thinking about abandonment and that people will leave. And so those things really help me. And I know I've talked about a lot of other strategies too, like the leaf one, right? Putting those negative thoughts on a leaf and letting it float away. Um, and it's just, it's so crazy. Like when it comes to confidence and self-esteem, it's again really focusing or listening to yourself, loving yourself. I know that sounds so cliche. We hear that all over. Self-love, love yourself, self-care. But like really, the root of it and my experience with it is listening to yourself and your body and being okay with what your body is saying or what you want to do for yourself. And when it comes to people pleasing tendencies and perfectionism, like you, even especially in the South Asian community, if you're an eldest sibling too, that can happen where you're just self-sacrificial so much, where when it comes to making your own decisions for yourself, it can be challenging. And I think that's what I struggled with a lot too, was because I sacrificed myself so much for like my sister and my family. It was really hard for me to figure out what I want. And I never thought I could do this, but I love sushi, and I've never like gone to a restaurant to eat by myself, and I've done that a couple times and I've enjoyed it so much. It's like really enjoying your own company. And it's so nice. Like I felt so good. I was spending time with myself and enjoying and
Self
just
date.
being at peace. What did you say?
I said self date. I love it.
Yes, a self-date. And it's really though like how you treat yourself really does reflect on the outside. I was sitting
Mm.
alone at this sushi restaurant and eating, and there was this really cute couple that were sitting next to me. And so my order came, like I was just like, relaxing. I wasn't even on my phone. Like I was just like at peace, eating, enjoying my sushi by myself. And the couple was so sweet. They were like, "What did you order? Like we want to know what you ordered." And we got into a conversation, and they were so sweet. And it's true. Like how you treat yourself really reflects on the outside, and it attracts, that positive energy too from others. Yeah.
Such a
So that's
beautiful
my story.
story. Wow, you really like gave some real thought and like insight into all
Mm,
of this. I'm so proud of you. Thank you for sharing
thanks.
all of that.
Of course. Thank you. Your tips
I
helped me like conceptualize a little bit more too. So that was helpful. Your
well, that's good.
definitions. Yeah.
I feel like you really hit on some of the things that I forgot about to even mention, like, the effect of self-esteem on our like self-image, like our body image, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how that shows
Mm-hmm.
up. And
Mm-hmm. It's a
I
big
mean, that's a
one,
really big one
especially in the South
for
Asian community.
absolutely for South Asian people, for women. I mean, just for people in general, like it's a huge
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even bring it up. Thank you for rounding it out with that.
Of course. It is so much. It's such a big topic and it's so abstract. There's so
Mm,
much to navigate, right? Like I'm sure there was probably so many things that I didn't still hit that people probably can resonate with.
I'm sure. Yeah.
It's so
Mhm.
it literally it taps into so many aspects of our life when it comes to self-esteem, decision making. We kind of hit on that, body image, self-love, right? Disagreements, like you talked about an example, right? Are you confident to disagree? Be the only person in the room to disagree, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
You have to really feel strongly about
How you feel
you as a person.
and how you think.
Yeah.
How
You have
much
to
how
have your
much
own
do you trust yourself? That's another thing. Your
Mhm.
self-esteem is related to that, in my opinion.
Exactly. And now that we're talking about it, I just want to point this out. Having high self esteem, like really, really high self esteem, not the things that we've been talking about, but like really high self esteem,
Mm-hmm.
it can sometimes come off seeming like narcissistic
Mm.
or narcissism itself
Or selfishness,
or selfishness. But there's a fine line between all of those things.
right?
And I think it's important to recognize that just because you have high self esteem doesn't mean that you are being
Mm-hmm.
narcissistic, doesn't mean you have narcissism, doesn't mean that you are being selfish.
Mm-hmm.
It's all on a spectrum. It depends on how far you are.
Yeah, and sometimes with at least a person, we've talked about this before, like when you move away from those people-pleasing tendencies, you set those boundaries because you have trust in yourself, you have that self-confidence and self-esteem. It can be, you could get pushback in the community and can get those reactions. I know we've talked about this in previous episodes too, like when we set boundaries that are important to us and that instill
Mhm.
that self-confidence and that can have that negative reaction sometimes, but that doesn't mean you're wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You're breaking cycles.
Generational cycle picker.
Hmm.
You can do it, everybody.
Yes.
I'm so proud of you.
I'm
If I
so
could go
proud of
back
you
in
too.
time, I would squeeze the crap out of you and just be like, "You're so lovable."
You're so sweet. I love you.
It's true
This is
though.
why we've stuck around. We've stuck around with each other. We're supportive.
Yeah, you were definitely one of those the supportive ones in college that
You
stuck
too.
around and made space for my boundaries and
You
made
too.
me feel like I could go on this journey for better self-esteem. So thank
Exactly.
you, my darling.
You too. Thank you. And look at us now. We're on a podcast. Woohoo.
I know, together, keeping it up, sharing
Yes,
with the world. I love it.
exactly.
Alrighty, well, this was a really good episode. I feel like I hope
Mm-hmm.
listeners agree. You can
Yes.
wrap us up whenever you're ready.
Yes. Yes, our lovely listeners, thank you again for your support so far. We're so excited that we're in season 2 now. It's so amazing. We appreciate your support and your positivity. Thank you for subscribing and following us. If you haven't done so, you can find us at any handle at Talk South Asian to me. And you can also reach us at Gmail, talksouthasian to me at gmail.com. All right. See you next episode.
Bye.
Bye.